Hi, everyone. This is Mr. Miller. So, today we're going to be learning about Americans' view on enemies during World War II. Learning targets are I can understand how America saw enemies in World War II. I can understand how racism and discrimination happened during this time period. I can understand that people do bad things during war, and I can relate how Americans treated certain minority groups of the Nazis treating Jews. And also, I should add how the Japanese treated different groups of Asian people during this time. So, why is this important? In America, we always see ourselves historically as like the good guys. That is not always true. America has done some very bad things over the course of history. It is important that you know about this. You can understand what American history really is. I think sometimes in our history classes, we just kind of like talk about all the positives of it, and that's not always the case. It's important also because war turns people into monsters. People as a whole act differently when a war is going on. You need to understand this. People are going to do things that they're usually not used to. Okay. So when you get to high school and college, you'll be taught some of these things. By getting ready now, you'll be prepared. Many people are ignorant when it comes to understanding American history. By teaching you this, I'm hoping I'm doing you a service so you understand what it's really like to be, understanding of American history. So, racism in America during World War II, like it or not, America has been a racist country for most of its existence. Today, America has gotten better, but there's still a long way to go. I don't have to go into much detail about that. You should understand. During World War II, Americans saw the Axis countries in a very negative light, especially Germany and Japan. Italy was also there, but it was not seen as bad as the other two countries. So, how America saw Asians in the past. Many of you may not know this, but America has had a very racist past when it comes to Asians living in America. And by all these shootings and the coronavirus problem, I understand that it still hasn't gotten any much better. In the 1800s, it was normal for people to lynch Asian Americans without being charged with murder, just like African Americans. Asians were only allowed to live in rundown parts of cities. Laws were made to make sure Asians did not get equal rights. Laws were similar to how African Americans were treated. Asians were seen as inferior beings by most Americans as well as Europeans because Asians were typically shorter than whites and were not white in skin color. So, how Americans viewed Japan during the war. When the war broke out, Asians were treated very badly still. Many did not have equal rights in America. Japan was seen as a bigger enemy than Germany because Germans were white and Japan was not, which is ironic because Germany had a bigger army and Germany had like much worse weapons than Japan did. Like Japan was not as much of a threat. A lot of racist propaganda, like here, was created in America about Japan, just like this picture on the right. So the stereotype of like the Japanese man having a big, big buck teeth and squinty glasses and squinty eyes, that is, a very racist thing. And if you look at the writing, it sounds like it is written like a stereotypical Asian person. So more propaganda, they would say like, the Japanese are rats. Um, and here's a picture of like a Japanese guy beating up an American soldier, and like he's look what it says here: stay on the job until every murdering Jap is wiped out. So like America's telling American soldiers that we need to kill every single Japanese person out there, which by modern standards is like almost a form of genocide if you think about it. So how Asians were treated in America. In America, all Asian people were clumped in with the Japanese. Like for example, like if someone was from China, they were a Chinese immigrant. Nope, you're Japanese. You're from the Philippines. Nope, you're Japanese. Most Asians were viewed as a possible threat, which resulted in a rise in hate crime throughout the country, kind of like it is today with the coronavirus. Laws were created in many states that would take away more Asian American rights. The federal government in Washington, D.C. would actually round up Asian Americans across the country and put them in internment camps. So, an internment camp is like a concentration camp, except they didn't kill anybody directly on purpose. It's not a very nice place, though. They put out like in the middle of the desert or near mountains and stuff where no one could find them. Internment camps are basically prison camps. And internment camps were put in parts of the desert, like I stated, in the Southwest, like Texas and Arizona. Internment camps are dirty and full of sickness. No one was allowed to leave until the war was over. The military did not kill any Asian Americans like the Nazis did, but 1,800 people died just from sickness, which is really, really bad. Um, and the war with Japan was much more brutal than the war with Germany. The reason, again, the Japanese were not seen as human while Germans were. Germans were white. Japanese are not. What many Japanese soldiers would fight to the death or commit suicide instead of being captured by Allied forces because most of the time Allied forces would kill the prisoners. Most, not all historians believe one reason why America dropped the nuclear weapons on Japan is because the Japanese were not seen as humans. They were seen as like these inferior people, so they could just take, getting hit by a nuke. Um, so Germans, when America was first founded, this is a long time ago. Americans did not like Germans because they were not English. Germans spoke a different language and had a different religion. Most Americans were like Lutheran or Protestant of some kind, and most Germans were Catholic. Germans are given bad jobs that nobody wanted and were looked down upon. America slowly learned to embrace Germans, and Germans were given equal rights. During World War I, Germans were seen by Americans as barbarians. They were still seen as humans, though, just as like bad people. During World War II, Americans German Americans were seen as American citizens and are not treated differently than anybody else. German immigrants that came to America right before the war were locked up in internment camps in Midwestern states. There's actually a concentration camp, or just say an internment camp, somewhere up north. I forgot where it is, but they put Germans there. Internment camps were much nicer than the Japanese one, but still bad. No Germans died in the camps. In war, Germans were taken prisoner and were treated with respect. Even after the Holocaust was discovered, there was still not that much bad treatment of most German forces that surrendered by Americans, which is a completely different, it's completely different than how the Japanese were treated. Propaganda. Germans were seen as humans, but they were seen as very cruel by Americans. Normal German citizens living in Germany were seen as easily trickable because they allowed Hitler to take control of the country. So, like the Germans living in Germany, like, oh, well, you're kind of silly or stupid because you allowed Hitler to just take over your country. So, more propaganda is like, Hitler's like this crazy murderer, and this is, he's destroying like American values. So that's pretty much it. Thank you very, very much for your time. I hope you have a wonderful day.